You are now watching an Agorist production by We Are Change Texas Hill Country and Truth Exposed Radio, coming to you from Austin, Texas at Brave New Books.
Taking time to undo the damage that's happened to us, then we're simply going to have another totalitarian, nasty system where people treat each other like crap. It all starts in here, and I think Derrick embodies that, and he's a wonderful communicator of those ideas. He's here in Austin to communicate them with you. Derrick Broze, ladies and gentlemen, at pt1, live free on Twitter. Thanks, brother.
All right. John always likes to remind everybody that I'm on Twitter.
Let's call him that instead of Derrick or
I
Broze.
think that's my new name. So, lots to talk about. I guess I know most of you are here either because you know John locally or because you want to see Adam talk about freedom. His amazing work in that book. So I'll give you a little bit of background on me for those who don't know. I'm from Houston, Texas. I've been working with John and Adam off and on for probably 3 or 4 years now. I started getting active in Houston at the end of 2009, early 2010. And started a group called the Houston Freethinkers, and similar to John's story, we were trying to do things through the political channels. We had some successes with kicking the TSA out of the city on buses and doing things like that, and rescinding the tyranny a little bit, but ultimately you come to the point where you realize the best solution is to work to compete with the state and to try to create counter-economic activity, counter-institutions, just to do the job better. People think that anarchy is saying that you don't want any government. Well, really, we're just saying we want to have self-government and that we can do a better job than the government can itself, and that starts on the individual level. So that's kind of the path I was on and have been on, and also more recently getting into journalism. I write for the Anti-Media, BenSwan.com, and Mid-Press News, and a few other sites, as well as run the Conscious Resistance Network. And that term, that idea of the conscious resistance, it actually came about the summer before I went and interned with Adam and really started to learn more about the ideas of liberty and voluntarism. And basically, that summer I had one of those nights, and I'm sure you've had them, you go through your process of awakening where you just research and research and research, and sometimes you can't sleep, you just get so sucked into these various ideas and rabbit holes. And it'd been a while since I'd done that, and for whatever reason, that summer, June 2012, I spent like 3 or 4 nights not sleeping, not eating, just like researching and researching and researching, trying to, I kept feeling like I was getting close to some type of answer that would help for me and other people. And eventually the idea, this thought of the conscious resistance and what that embodies, what that means to me, came about. And essentially, I define that as the point in time when you decide that I don't even like using the word struggle, but your claiming of your freedom and your path, when you recognize that it goes deeper than just fighting the physical manifestations of tyranny that we see in the world every day, whether that be literally looking at the government and the people that these puppets they put in place, and when you realize, these people are just abstractions on the bigger issues. As John was saying, I tend to say that we can spread these ideas of liberty and anarchy and move towards a more prosperous society, but if we don't all go through the peaceful parenting and the healing, then the revolution, I believe, is going to be a disaster, because eventually we'll have a bunch of know-it-all anarchists running around full of ego and not done any of that personal work, and that'd probably be a lot more of a disgusting situation than we want to deal with. So, essentially that's the thesis of this. Until we're willing to do that, again, anarchy and this decision to be a free person, even if you don't use the word anarchist, if you don't consider yourself to be an anarchist, the decision to be a free human being in general comes from within. We understand, I think most people here would understand the failures and the fallacies of collectivism and how important it is for the individual to claim their own freedom and then for us to come together collectively, voluntarily, to make change. So in that same sense, you have to decide. I can't sit here and talk to you and tell you about these ideas and how great it is to meditate and to spend time in self-reflection and going through some of these painful experiences, but getting to know myself better. Because I essentially believe that if you don't know what your doubts, your fears, your insecurities are, your aspirations, your limitations, your hopes, if you truly don't know those things, then how can you know what it means to be free? And if you don't know what it means to be free, then how will you know if you ever get there? And so to me, this is the other side of the coin. And so I wrote a book about it with John Vibes. It's called The Conscious Resistance, Reflections on Anarchy and Spirituality. And that's essentially what I'm going to kind of cover tonight. I don't have any more copies tonight, but I will be passing around this thing here. I'm doing an event in Houston on the 26th, and then after that, all the books that I have after that event will be brought back here to the bookstore. If anybody is interested in writing their name or contact info when I'm done, then I can make sure that you get a book. And also you can download it for free if you go to consciousresistance.com/book. The whole book PDF form is available there. And I ask that if you enjoy it, please share it. What I've found is apparently me and John Vibes, who's my writing partner, are some of the only people to put these ideas together in writing. If you do a search of anarchy and spirituality, there are a few talks here and there from some people, but there's no text, there's no literature on these ideas. And I think because some of it has probably been hidden, because when people think of spirituality, they tend to think of religion, and when you think of religion, you think of the state, you think of control, and that doesn't sound very free at all. So we try to pull the wool back from those ideas and show that actually many of the world's major religions, Christianity, Buddhism, Tao, even some early Islamic teachings are actually rooted in anti-authoritarianism. But it was only later, whenever the political institutions came along and made them these organized religions, that they changed and co-opted the message of these teachers to make it where it was more about bowing down to a teacher, or you can only get to that God through our books or through our classes or through our book. They basically created the priestly class. And Michael Harner, he's an anthropologist. He studied shamanism and studied indigenous cultures and just history in general, and really did some great work in pointing out that before the state institution came along, the religious institutions already maintained control. They did that through fear of God or going to hell or these different punishments. Before they were able to do that, though, people expressed themselves and looked towards the sky and looked to philosophy to try to come to their own terms of what reality was, what God was, what the universe was, what existence was, and all these various things. So you had shamans come about. And shamanism is kind of a controversial term. I think it's a very limited term. Some people even say it's a racist term, but it's basically a term that was made up by Western anthropologists to define traditions all around the world that really have very little in common. Basically, any culture around the world that was practicing something that they couldn't put a name on or label on could be generally termed shamanism. But there are some common traits which would include a trance-like state. Generally, there's a difference between a shaman. It's not a witch doctor. It's nothing like that. He's a community, or he or she is a community leader. They sometimes, depending on the culture, use plant medicine to ingest and to go on deep, powerful experiences to connect to God, to connect to the spirits. Sometimes they do it through drumming, through music. Sometimes through meditation. So we see these various strains. And what Michael Harner noted is that before the religious institutions came along, you had people in total anarchy choosing how to interpret the world, choosing which path to God made sense to them, coming up with their own interpretation of the world, coming up with their own interpretation of the universe and the great mysteries that we all ponder throughout our life. And then after a period of time, those institutions came along and we hear about the witches burning, right? Anybody who spoke anything outside of the dogma that was being preached in that particular area of the world was eliminated. You had all types of cultures and indigenous people and teachings just wiped out because they didn't go hand in hand with what the state was trying to teach, or what the religious institutions were trying to teach. And eventually, religion, politics have become one, and those are, I think most people would say, you've got banking institutions, you've got government and state, and you've got religion. Those are the three areas that kind of control and manipulate people's lives. So what we're trying to do is say that you can still be interested in spirituality, you can still be interested in these great mysteries and wonders of the world. In fact, we believe that there's a benefit to it, and still be a free thinking, self-governing, critical thinking person. You don't have to, I would even argue, I know there's some people who say they are Christians and they are anarchists, they are Christians and they are libertarians, but they have a more they have a view that's less based on what the church says, what the official leaders say, and more of their own interpretation. And as we point out in the book, when we look at Christ's actual actions, whether historical or just metaphorical, look at the actions in those stories. Tossing out bankers seemed to be his only violent act. The only time he's ever expressed any anger is when he's telling the bankers to get the fuck out. So, and he was also very much about pursuing your own knowledge, finding God within yourself. You can look up the Gnostic Gospels and the books that didn't make it into the official canon of the Bible, and see that there are some things that don't go hand in hand with the message that the Roman Catholic Church was trying to promote, which was basically like, you have to bow down, say these words, say this ritual, say this thing, attend these meetings, attend these churches, and then you will have access to the heavens, rather than you can create heaven right here on earth, which is the same thing anarchy is saying. We don't need the government to do that, and we're saying we don't need the religious institutions to ponder these big questions. There's a phrase that I came up with a while back, and John and I did a bunch of podcasts together and basically developed the material that ended up in this book. And for me, anarchy is to statism as spirituality is to religion. See that? So anarchy is freedom in the physical sense, freedom when it comes to the state, and the state is obviously trying to control us in that physical sense, and spirituality, pursuing knowledge in your own, again, individual path that's going to look different for everybody, is freedom in that sense, while the religious institutions are trying to control us in that esoteric, more spiritual sense. Now, some of the things that we do in this book, I might do this now briefly, but we define terms because it's easy to have a conversation if you actually know what you're talking about, so we can agree on those terms. So within the book, we define freedom. I think you guys all understand that, but generally we use the definition of freedom, the absence of coercion. We also define consciousness because we talked about that and some other topics in the book, and that itself is a tricky word to define. And spirituality, when I say spirituality, I simply mean a practice that brings you closer to your essence, to your true being, to who you are, something that you're doing, whether that means walking, sitting down, meditating, writing. I mean, it can be anything. I think people kind of get tied up into what this practice looks like. We're taught that spirituality is dogmatic, that there's a rigid set of rules. But really, something can be a spiritual experience to you. It doesn't have to involve praying on your knees, bowing down, giving over your life. If that fits for your teaching, then that's great. But I think that's what scares, and what I've found, especially in writing the book, and talk to a lot of anarchists who tend to be atheists, they immediately are turned away by this book. And I really try to challenge those, and anybody in the audience listening who is a strict atheist, to look at this book, because we're not pushing any type of dogma, but rather trying to expand our minds into some new areas that I think are important for the inquisitive, anarcho-libertarian, voluntarist-minded people to pursue their path to freedom. We also define agorism.